Welcome, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today. We are really excited to have Bob Lupton here with us to talk through some of your practical questions and questions about application that you have about effective charity. So before we jump into that and before I introduce Dr. Lupton, let me just introduce myself real quick. My name is Avery West, and I'm the Director of Community Initiatives for True Charity. And for those of you who are new to True Charity, I want to give you a warm welcome. We exist to champion a national movement of voluntary, effective charity at the most local level. So a big part of what we do then is resourcing you, the people at the most local level. So educational webinars like this are a big part of that. So how this is going to work is for the first half, I'll be asking questions. And then for the second half, we'll open it up to the audience. So at the bottom of your screen there, you'll see a Q&A button. So if you just click on that, you can submit your questions and we will get to as many of them as we can during this hour. So it's my great honor to introduce Dr. Bob Lupton. Dr. Lupton has invested over 40 years of his life in inner city Atlanta. Bob and his wife Peggy and their two sons sold their suburban home and moved into the inner city where they've lived and served as neighbors among those in need. He's the author of several books, including the widely read Toxic Charity, Theirs is the Kingdom, Renewing the City, and Charity Detox. Bob has a PhD in psychology from the University of Georgia. He serves as speaker and strategist with those throughout the nation who seek to establish God's shalom in the city. So welcome, Bob.
My pleasure to be with you.
First, I would just love to give you a chance to share about your background. So could you tell us a bit about yourself, how you made this shift from relief work to really effective community development, and then what you're doing now?
And you want me to tell you about 40 years of my journeying in about 4 minutes?
Go for it.
Well, it kind of all started, my background was originally business. But during the Vietnam conflict, I was one of those, I suppose, fortunate ones that was drafted and sent to Vietnam. I thought it would be a wasted year of my life. God used that experience, though, to change my whole direction. I met a lot of young men over there, young GIs who had gotten drafted, and they were a lot of them brought problems with them. So there's a lot of drugs over there, and so I was able to get involved with helping a lot of young men get their high school GEDs, kick nasty drug habits, etc. God used that experience to ignite within me a sense of calling. So when I got out of the military, I started a program with the juvenile court in Atlanta, and started working with kids on probation. This became a calling for me, and so the first 5-7 years or so of my work in Atlanta were with kids on probation. It didn't take very long to figure out that you can't work very effectively with troubled kids apart from their family situations. And so I went back to school to learn how to counsel families, and expanded our ministry to include the families, only to realize that you can't work very effectively with struggling families apart from the environment that impacts on them every time they step out of the door. And so that pushed me to get more involved with what was going on in the neighborhood, in the housing projects, what was happening with the police and drug trafficking. And I finally realized that if you really want to change an environment, the very best way to do that is to become a part of that environment and work from within to affect change. So that was a very big decision that we as a family made to move from the suburbs into the heart of the inner city of Atlanta, and essentially become neighbors with those we felt a calling to serve. I went in as kind of felt like a missionary, and that feeling, that idea of going in to save people, uh, didn't didn't last too long. It was much more. Uh, I discovered in the inner city there was faith that I never knew existed there among those who were very poor, and that probably was the biggest surprise of all for me, that God was calling me to become a neighbor among the poor, uh, at least as much for my own salvation or my own transformation, as it was to those who I came to serve. And so that started and my efforts to try to change the community that we were part of, the school where our kids went down the street, the drug trafficking that was going on, all that was going on in that neighborhood became our issues, and so it was a movement from trying to reach kids with the good news of the gospel, into becoming a neighbor among the poor. And that was a gradual transition, but one that has dramatically shaped the way we have gone about ministry.
That is so beautiful. Thanks for sharing that with us. So what's something that you've encountered recently, maybe a book or an article or a podcast? I know a lot of people on this call went through reading your book, Toxic Charity, through our True Charity Book Club. But that was written about a decade ago. So we'd love to hear something that you've read recently or heard recently that's kind of taught you something new about community development, or maybe tweaked the way that you think about it a little bit.
Well, the two most powerful influences in my life are two men that are older than I am. Ray Bakke, who has written books. Ray is he's an urbanologist and one of the most brilliant men I've met. He moved his family into inner city Chicago, and I got acquainted with him, and his influence has been dramatic in my life. Another person who is a hero of mine, also has written many books, is John Perkins. John is in Mississippi. John's well up in his 80s now, still going at it, still very active. The book that he first wrote was Let Justice Roll Down, and it opened my eyes to a lot of the issues, the racial issues in our society and in the city. John was nearly beaten to death during the civil rights era, got out of Mississippi, went to California, but God called him to come back and live in the very community there that had nearly taken his life. But John was a big influence and continues to be a big influence in my life, one who is living out the reconciliation of the gospel, particularly among economically diverse people and racially diverse people. So those are two very big influences in my life that continue to be present influences in my life. Ray really opened up to me poverty issues and issues of injustice globally. And so I was able to travel around the globe with him and met many, many people who are doing doing pretty amazing things. One author that I came in contact with, she is an economist from Africa. Matter of fact, I keep her book fairly close to me. It's Dead Aid. I'll hold it up there where you can see it. Dead Aid is it's a New York Times bestseller. It's been out a while, but essentially it takes a look at what happens with aid when it is given to a country, given to a people that creates unhealthy dependencies and works against people becoming using an economy to do well. It has just the opposite effect, creates dependencies, erodes the work ethic. And so Moyo is an influence in my life that continues to be. I don't know if she's come out with anything in the last couple of years, but there's a book worth reading.
Yeah, it's so interesting to read those stories of kind of national or even on the continent level of dependency created, and to know that that is also true on the individual level.
It is, yeah.
Okay, so I promised our audience members that we would get into the real nitty gritty here. So I would love to ask you, a lot of people read Toxic Charity or When Helping Hurts, one of these kinds of books that change the way that they think about poverty, right? And they get so excited, and then they are put in this difficult position where maybe they aren't the one running the mission or the food pantry or the church benevolence ministry or whatever it is, and they want to talk to that person in leadership about these ideas. And those are really difficult conversations. So what is your advice for these people who want to talk to these people in leadership who've poured maybe decades of their life into this ministry that we might consider toxic? So how do you affirm the heart behind their work while also kind of respectfully suggesting a new way forward?
You're raising a very delicate issue there, because there are wonderful people in churches and ministries all over the country, literally all over the world, who are doing sacrificial work of feeding and clothing those who've fallen off the lower end of the economic scale, doing heroic work in a real sense. And these are people whose hearts are absolutely right, and very often are unaware that the very things that they are doing, feeding, clothing, housing the poor, in the way they're going about it, it actually increases the poverty and the dependency that the very people that they are called to serve, the very folks, those are the very folks that are being hurt by what I have called toxic charity. So it's a very difficult issue. You go into a church and you're not going to, very often they call me in because I'm an outsider, but I've had some experience in the inner city, and so those are it's a hard message for people of goodwill, people of charity, to hear that they may be hurting actually more than helping. So how do you go about that? One of the things that one of the ways that I have gone about that, rather than a frontal assault to tell people what they're doing is wrong,
Right.
To say, we know that you want to do the very best in terms of ministry to the poor. And so we would suggest that you study best practices that are going on in your city or other cities around the country. when you have a committee that will go and visit those. Let's say you're running a food pantry. So you want to go and find those who are doing the very best job of feeding the poor through their churches or through their nonprofits. That's non-threatening. That essentially communicates the message: you're doing good work, but we want to be the best. And so everybody wants to improve what they're doing. Then I will suggest to them a couple of cutting edge ministries that have made the shift. Let's say they're doing a food pantry. Those who have made the shift from free food giveaway, the handouts, versus those that have turned that into, for example, a food co-op, where folks join that co-op. They pay essentially pay dues to that co-op, which helps cover some of the cost of operations. And when people of faith and goodwill see something that is the benefits of doing that, and ask the question, so you're actually charging people for the food that we have donated? Well, those are the best folks to explain the way we did it before. By always giving out food, we created an unhealthy dependency. And it was the same folks that were coming back every week, and they were not moving out of poverty. They were becoming dependent on our gifts, and we realized that there was some unhealthy things going on there. And so the co-op was a way that we could equalize that, so that everybody has something to contribute. Our message is that no one is so poor that they have nothing to contribute. Everyone has something to contribute. And so the job of the person distributing the food is to find out what those gifts are and to engage those participants in a reciprocal relationship. So it moves the discussion off of how much food you're giving out, how many tons of food, how many people you're serving, to what are the outcomes of this? Do we see people moving out of poverty, increasing levels of responsibility, etc.? So that would give you some example of how we ease into that difficult situation and acquaint those that are doing toxic charity with those who are doing developmental work and really enabling the poor to move out of poverty. Does that get at what your question was?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's
okay.
Yeah, that's really helpful to introduce people to real examples so that they can see and maybe be reminded of those outcomes, not just outputs. Like, oh, right, what we want is not to distribute as much food as we can per day. What we want is to see people flourish, see their lives really change.
Right. Yeah.
Right. Well, I'm glad you brought up that food co-op model, which I think so many people are excited about. And we talk to a lot of people, at True Charity who are trying to implement this idea. And a problem that we hear from them a lot, and I'm sure you've seen this too, so I'm interested to get your take on it, is a lot of these larger food banks who then distribute to the smaller food pantries have these restrictions where they say, you can't require anything of the people who receive this food, right? And so they kind of mandate the one-way giving that we know is so disempowering to people. And so a lot of people say, oh gosh, we can't get any food this way. If we want a co-op model, we're not going to be able to get this food that we have been getting from our food pantry, from those larger food banks. So how would you go about, or how did you in Atlanta go about getting food in those situations?
Uh, there is, it gets you into politics is what happens
Hmm.
because the large food banks, Feeding America is the big kind of uh, the large national program that coordinates the majority of our food distribution in the country. And they have interpreted the law in a way that says you cannot require anything in return. It's not a reciprocal relationship. It is one way. And to those people making those decisions, that seems like a very charitable thing to do. They have not realized the downside of that. Um, and so we have honored their regulations that said we can't charge for food. So we can't sell the free food that the food bank gives us. But because we're connected to a church, people can make contributions. You do offerings at churches. You collect an offering, uh, or you can have a support group built around food, where people will say, if our dues are $5 a month or a week or whatever it is. So the money that they contribute is not directly for the food that they're getting. So we can honestly say that we are not selling that food. They're not buying the food, uh, but we have to maintain separate budgets. So there has to be um, we have to be able to demonstrate that we are actually not selling the food, but this is the dues that are a part of just membership, and we can pay for the gas for the truck to go over and pick up the food and other kinds of. If we end up having staff, some of the folks that as our little co-ops have grown larger, we need to staff that. So members of the co-ops end up becoming leaders, and those become part-time positions. So the money that folks pay for membership in the co-op can go to the support of the group, but we're careful not to commingle the finances. We're careful to keep that separate. And that way, our food bank says that, we think that that's a legitimate way of doing it. Again, some food banks want to be very rigid about that. And so if you're going to do a co-op, you need to do it. You need to get your food from other sources besides the large food banks, and that's not a difficult way of doing it. It's different. We collect food through our churches, and the food pantries that are in our churches. We say just let's do a food co-op together, and that you can do an exchange relationship with that food, because folks are not getting they're not getting a tax deduction on the gifts of the food. It just comes into the church. There's another group in Florida who are doing a very effective job. It's called Up with let's see, Up with something against poverty. At any rate, I'll think of the name of it. They have started a food store. They can't get money from their food bank because they sell this food, but they go right directly to the manufacturers, the big manufacturers of the food, and say, we've got a better way. Will you donate that? Will you donate your food directly to us? You can take your tax write-off, but yes, we're going to sell it, and they sell it for 30 cents on the dollar. So members of their co-op get a tremendous bargain, 30% of what would cost them a full a dollar. And then they use that money to provide a whole range of services that their members need. They need job training, they need computer training, they need various, they need connections to jobs, some sort of alcohol and drug rehab programs. And so that money that they earn goes back into the very folks that are a part of their co-op. It's a very creative way of doing it. Let's see, against poverty.
Is it United Against Poverty?
Yeah, that's what it is.
Okay.
But that's a great model. But
Yeah.
but they firmly believe that the giveaway programs are very unhealthy for the participants and society at large.
Yeah, that's so helpful. Yeah, those really practical ways and kind of getting around those mandates. Very helpful. All right, well, we are going to now shift to our questions from the audience. So I have
does it get tough now?
Yeah, this is really this is where the rubber meets the road. We'll see.
That's good. That'll be fun.
I know, this is great. Okay, so here's one question. This individual is saying, I love the idea of exchange. However, how do we avoid veering into exploitative exchange for the poor? Any advice for those who want to explore business as ministry to avoid the perception of making money off the backs of the poor?
Well, it's always a tendency to whether you're charging too much, but the closer you come to a market exchange, in other words, for example, we changed our clothes closet into a thrift store. We've got to keep we got to sell those clothes in order to pay the overhead. We ought to keep the lights on, pay the staff, the workers. But if we charge too much for those clothes, then folks will say, well, it's just too expensive. I can get a better deal down at Kmart. And
Right.
so there is a point. Too much is not, you could say it's exploitive, but the bottom line is, if it's not a good enough bargain, folks are just not going to shop there. And so, for example, at Christmas time, we convert part of our store to a Christmas store. And we gather in donated toys and clothes and all of that, all kinds of Christmas gifts, and we turn it into a store, Christmas store. And then the issue always comes up, of course, most of this is all new toys. The question comes up, okay, what shall we fix the prices on? How do we determine? There is, if it's too low, let's say you've got a doll that is, I don't know, a $10 doll, and you're selling it for a quarter. Well, everybody knows that that's not a legitimate exchange. That's a giveaway that tries to make folk feel better because they're contributing a quarter, but everybody knows that's not an authentic economic exchange. So if the doll is worth $10, if you can buy it at Kmart, then you can't compete with that. But if that doll is marked out at at less than half the price that they can get it anywhere else, that's obviously a real bargain. And so that's how we tend to price the things that we sell. Some folks who have tried to shift from the clothes closet to a thrift operation just want to charge a nickel a garment or some small token amount, and so that the customers are they're feeling like they're giving something, and so it'll be a little more pride in that. But folks see through they see through that, and they know that nickel on the garment doesn't mean anything to anybody. And so a legitimate bargain, see, I think that's a universal value that everyone loves to find a bargain.
Yeah.
You know, rich or poor, everybody loves to find a bargain.
Yeah.
And so if you bring bargains into the community, folks are excited about that. They discover a bargain, and but nobody likes to be somebody's charity case. That depletes people of dignity and pride, and so it's somewhere between too low and too high that we find an equitable kind of exchange. Let's hope that that answers our question asked from the audience here.
Yes. Yeah, that's really helpful to think about, not just patting someone on the head like, oh, well, if you give me a nickel, I'll give this to you. But what is a real economic exchange, that giving them the dignity of that? Yeah.
Well, and the question is, do we really need them? And if it's for a nickel, no. That's, as a matter of fact, that's just more hassle to keep track of than it is to, it's to collect. But do we need the money that they pay for the bargains that they get? Do we need that money for operations, for overhead, for keeping the lights on? Yeah, we really do. And folks pick up on that. Am I needed? Am I valued? And so how do we keep folks coming back to we want them to buy as many clothes as they can afford, as opposed to guarding against folks getting too much. That's what the giveaway system tends to lead to. So we put guards in place so that they don't get more than their share. If it's a legitimate exchange, we need them, they need us, then that's a healthy state of affairs. Everybody benefits.
The incentives are in the right place there for both parties.
Yeah.
Well, we actually have a question relating to that idea that you mentioned, where we have to put guards in place, limiting people's what they receive so that they don't get more than their share. So one man is writing in, he's saying, we're having a cold snap in Colorado Springs, near 0 temperatures. We have a large homeless population that camps around our large rescue mission for food, shelter, clothing, and other no questions asked handouts. Many will come in from the cold and then head back out to their tents as things warm up. So what should a large rescue mission do regarding limiting handouts after a period of time? We hit -10 degrees last night. Would you do anything different for the extreme cold?
The question then is this: emergency assistance, or are we about developing folks who have talents and abilities, who need to be able to find ways to implement those, to make a living themselves? That's developmental work. When calamity strikes, that's time to do emergency relief, emergency assistance. So for example, in our situation, We've got the food co-op, which folks at the very low rung economically benefit from. And then we've got a grocery store, which everybody can shop in, rich or poor. Good bargains, fresh fruit and vegetables. So we have food available to the community based on their income level. Well, when COVID hits and folks lose their jobs and they can't pay their rent anymore, that's an emergency. And so we have had to shift into it would be a giveaway program. We live in the community. We know who is hurting. We know that there are seniors on fixed income, but they can't get out. They have to be quarantined. And so we shifted our program into a free food delivery program, particularly those most vulnerable in our community. And we got volunteers from the community to go out and deliver boxes of groceries to those who couldn't get out or were in a vulnerable situation. Well, that's a giveaway program. But in times of emergency, that's absolutely the right thing to do. The challenge for us, of course, is how long do you keep that going? How long do we stay in the giveaway program? Mm-hmm. We know that when the immediate crisis is passed, then we need to start phasing out of that and getting back into a purely developmental mode because folks have capacities and they need contacts and training, etc. But in the meantime, while the crisis exists, we have to do emergency assistance for people to survive. When temperature reaches those kind of, 0 degrees, like our caller is talking about, that's an emergency, and we have to shift into a giveaway, a personal support kind of strategy until the weather warms and there are systems that we develop that will help move folks from their homeless situation into more permanent housing, permanent lifestyle.
Okay, so you're saying when there are extreme conditions like a pandemic or like below 0 temperatures, it's all right to kind of meet that with relief. But then
right. It's not only all right, it's essential. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's a vitally important shift that saves lives.
Right.
So we can't devalue or diminish that at all. It's when the crisis has passed and the emergency of assistance has gone out and the blankets and the food have been distributed and the crisis has passed, then it's the shift back into the developmental agenda that we need to do. Now, the tricky thing about that is that it's a whole lot easier to raise money for emergencies than it is for programs to develop people. Yeah. And so the tendency is, because money is easier to raise for an emergency, the tendency is to stay in that giveaway mode longer than we should, simply because it's easier to fund.
Right.
So that's a tension that we find ourselves in when we're shifting out of emergency assistance.
Right. It's so important to bring donors in on that vision of empowering.
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
Great. Thank you. All right, we have some more questions, and audience, feel free to send in more questions too as you think of them. So here's one. How can we get local businesses to move away from their refusal to give felons a chance at employment?
Well, what I have found is that employers that I have some relationship with, uh, who also know that I am living, serving in the community, and we are providing support for those that are coming out of prison, or that have criminal records. Uh, and if I give a recommendation to an employer to hire a young man or young woman who does have a record, the chances are a lot better that that they will that they'll take a risk and hire somebody with a record. If you don't have that personal connection, then it's really much more difficult. Uh, but for example, a young man, one of my neighbors right across the street, he got involved with wrong guys, wrong time, and ended up being getting convicted for a murder. Uh, he wasn't the trigger man, but he was involved in it, and so they sent him away for, oh gee, I don't. He was gone for about 5 years. I don't know what his sentence was, but he came out and then had to wear a an ankle bracelet, and part of his release was that he had to get a job, uh, become gainfully employed. Well, with a record and with a bracelet on, he was not having any luck at all, and so he was wondering if I could help him find a job. Well, I didn't know what this kid's. Uh, I knew him, but I didn't know what his values were coming out of 5 years in prison. But we had one of our stores. It was a little home furnishing store. Uh, we said, "Why don't you come on and work with us for a few hours, and that'll put some money in your pocket, and then you can begin to establish a job record." And so he did that. We paid him minimum wage. It was, wasn't a job that would have a future for him, but he could build a resume around that. Well, when he was with us for probably 6 months, and he said he really would like to get into the air conditioning industry. Uh, well, he was showing that he had, you know, prison hadn't done him wrong, and he was a good worker, and he was responsible, and so we gave him a recommendation for an air conditioning company there in the city, and they hired him, and that was the beginning of a whole new career for him, which he's done well in that. Well, that would not have happened without an intermediary person. Mm. And I think that's one of the benefits that we have that we when we have relationships with folks that are struggling. We kind of know who they are, and we employ a good many folks from the community, and over time, those that are doing well, doing responsibly, showing up to work every day on time, the basics that an employer is looking for, those are folks that are not at all difficult to place, find an opening in the economic mainstream. So apart from relationships, I don't know how you do that. Other than if you've got a strong program that has good results and it's producing good hireable employees, then I find that employees are looking for people who are honorable, that'll come to work every day on time and have a decent attitude. They're looking for good employers. It's just or employees. It's just that they need somebody to vouch for.
Right. That's such a good example of how tackling a problem like that on a huge scale is almost insurmountable. But when you do it with
It is.
relationship, with one-on-one, yeah.
It is.
Okay, we have so many good questions coming in. We're not going to have time to get to all of them, but so we'll try to get to a couple more before we have to head out here today.
Those are good questions.
I know.
Yeah.
It's so good. So here's one that maybe you could answer real quick. One woman is asking about a community chaplain. So your organization, Focus Community Strategies, talks about this community chaplain who's a visionary regarding the assets already present in the community, focuses on building relationships, always ready to pray with people, model what neighboring looks like. So she's saying, I find myself doing many of these things in our small community, and I'm trying to discern if I should invest the time and resources to become academically certified as a chaplain or just continue to do the job on a volunteer basis.
We started this community chaplain idea a decade ago, and what we found was that actually there was a seminary in Atlanta that wanted to strengthen their urban program, and the idea of creating a major in community chaplaincy struck them well. And we had a fellow who he had his doctorate in ministry of some sort, but he had all the qualifications of being a professor in that area. He lived in the city himself, and so they approved under his leadership. They approved a major in community chaplaincy. Well, that gave good legitimacy for folks who wanted to have certification, wanted to have a degree, and then major institutions, churches, and other nonprofits are looking for folks who have those kind of credentials. But over a decade, we realized that the kind of training that, for the most part, you get in seminaries is almost irrelevant to what is needed to do good community chaplaincy work. There are some courses that are vitally important: cross-cultural communication, understanding the economics, racial issues. There's some of those that you would not get in a typical seminary environment that are important. But frankly, there are very few programs that seminaries provide that would equip you for being an effective community chaplain. I think the thing that's most important is your own sensitivity, your sense of calling to those in need. And when you say community chaplain, that covers a broad scope of functions. That could be ended up being, prison ministries, pregnant moms, all kinds of, there are many ways to become involved. And there are courses that seminaries and universities have that will be useful to that. But it probably makes most sense to tailor those particular courses to the particular needs or of your calling, as opposed to expect that you can get an MDiv from a seminary and now you're a community chaplain. Probably doesn't work quite that easily.
Okay, that's really helpful. All right, I have one more question for you, and I'm sure this is one that you get often, and I've been interested to hear your answer to this. So, Dr. Lupton, your move to an inner city neighborhood to truly help the poor is inspiring. But poor neighborhoods are often neighborhoods with the most crime. As you say in your book, you want to fix the world one crack house at a time. What kind of precautions did you take for the safety of your family, and what kind of precautions would you recommend?
One of the important things, it became important for us when we made that move into a high crime area, was that we were not doing it alone.
Mm.
There were other folks on our staff that had agreed to do the same thing. We also met people in the community who were good community leaders uh, and welcomed us into the neighborhood so that we were just not invading someone else's community. And so I think that's important that you go in concert with others of like mind, not necessarily all your staff, but at least a relationship with neighbors. See, we've been working before we moved into the city. We'd been working in that same community for 10 years, so we knew a lot of the neighbors, a lot of the kids, and so it wasn't like we were moving in among strangers, but we were welcomed by neighbors who had been living there for a long time. Many of whom were, had financial and other kinds of needs. So that's one thing, not going in alone. I think setting boundaries, who your kids play with, where they go out and play. Our biggest, I think our biggest decision to make was what school we put our kids in.
Right.
And we didn't really know much about the school other than the quality of education was low. But we went to see the principal and said, if we enroll our kids here, first of all, we want to see the test scores. And so they were pretty bad. But we said, if we enroll our kids here, can we be involved in the school? Can we be in the classroom? Can we bring volunteers in? And he said, how many and how soon? He said, we need all the help we can get. And so based on that, we put our kids in the local elementary school, and the teachers were glad to see us come. As a matter of fact, the teachers soon told us, we're spending a disproportionate amount of our time with behavior problem children. We're doing a lot of management, but not much education because of that. And so they said, if you could help us get these kids out of our class into something that would be more appropriate for them, that would be a huge help. Well, we hired a school teacher. And the principal said, yes, take these kids down to your church if you want to. He said, we need help. And so the teachers identified those kids with the severest behavior problems. We started a program for those kids and took them out of the classroom, got involved with their families, found out what the many of the problems were about. A lot of them stemmed from home, and so teachers were freed up to be able to teach, and so consequently, we saw the test scores grow dramatically over the 5 years. Our youngest son, was there, and very little change in the demographics, still mostly low-income kids, but the teachers were they're freed up to teach. So education was a very big issue. We made the decision, if we saw our kids being harmed by that, or were not getting educated properly, that we would not sacrifice them on the altar of our calling. But in fact, the kids did very well in the public system, and that became a good decision for them. But parenting is vitally important, and we were fortunate that our kids benefited far more than they were disadvantaged by the school and the environment. Actually, our kids became much more sensitive to those in needs than we were, and so that was it proved to be a good thing.
Wow. That is so encouraging and really helpful in thinking through that, especially those boundaries and that decision that you made, like
Yeah.
about not sacrificing your children. Well, thank you so much, Bob, for sharing your time and your wisdom with us today. I so appreciate it.
Delight to be with you. Yes.
Yeah.
Hope we can see the folks in Joplin again soon.
Yes. Yeah. And thank you, audience members, all for joining us. I hope it was helpful. I'm going to be sending out a survey, and we would just love to hear your feedback. We want to serve those of you on the front lines. So we want to know whether what we're doing is really helpful to you. If you did find this valuable and helpful, I would love to invite you to our annual summit. So this is, it's going to happen May 18th and 19th in Joplin, Missouri. We're going to be talking about justice. So what does that idea of justice really mean economically, socially? Dr. Lawrence Reed is going to be our keynote speaker. Dr. Lupton was actually the keynote speaker a couple years ago. It's going to be a great time. You'll learn a lot, and you'll also get a lot of time to connect with other practitioners from around the country, charity practitioners who are solving the same kind of problems that you are on a daily basis. So we are really excited about that. You can check it out on our website, truecharity.us. And right now there's early bird pricing. So you can get the universally beloved bargain that Bob shared about. I also want to just share with you, I know we didn't get to all of your questions. We had some great questions about panhandling and starting a co-op, how to share these ideas with volunteers and staff. We have resources and consulting and trainings for all of those issues. So we would love to talk to you. That's really just what our team loves to do, is come alongside people who love these principles and want to bring it down to the real life application level. So if you want to email me, Avery@truecharity.us, you can also just send me a message here in the webinar and I'll get in contact with you. We would really love to talk with you, and I'll help you get plugged in with the part of True Charity that would be most helpful to you. So thank you so much. I really hope this was helpful as you love your neighbors living in poverty. And I hope everyone has a lovely day. Thanks again, Bob. Bye.